Man, these Democrats really think America's stupid. Let's put these Democrats on blast for telling these lies. All this and more on The Reading Room. Chuck Schumer, New York Democrat senator who is the majority leader, is coming out on top, blasting the Republicans for impeaching Mayorkas because they're doing it on behalf of Trump. I'm going to show you why they're full of horseshit in a second, but let's look at this article that Chuck Schumer had given an interview to in The Hill. Now, if you've been paying attention to this channel just for a little bit, you know that I've been talking about Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the head of the Department of Homeland Security and responsible for this whole entire border shit show. So this senator from New York says, what House Republicans are doing by advancing this sham impeachment effort is denigrating our Constitution, all for the sake of appeasing one person and one person only, Donald Trump. He said on the Senate floor, and let's be clear, this unserious spectacle by House Republicans does nothing to secure the border. All right, let's pause right there. So Schumer was not in this committee hearing yesterday that went on for 15 hours. And this seemed to be the central theme that each and every one of the Democrat committee members had been pushing, ignoring everything, the facts, ignoring the witness statements, ignoring what they saw with their own eyes to align with this political agenda. And the fact that they point their finger at the Republicans saying that this impeachment is all for theatrics and all for political show falls on deaf ears because the people are not stupid. But I would like to show you how stupid these Democrats are because they truly need to be kicked out of office. I was so dumbfounded watching these Democrats all sing from the same playbook, defending Mayorkas, who has violated the Constitution. What is alarming to me, and you've witnessed this with AOC, as I showed in a previous video, that even in the face of people telling them what the reality is, they refuse to accept it. So they just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. So for them to come out and say that the Republicans did not show any evidence that Mayorkas violated the Constitution, that's 100% a lie. And the Republicans in this 15-hour marathon called them out on several occasions. These are the Democrats that were in this committee yesterday. If you notice, the majority of them are not Caucasian. Their biggest gripe was going back to Trump. When you look at the Republicans, I think the disadvantage that they have, and sadly, this is the world that they have created, these Democrats have created this racist division. And now we see this hatred coming from people of color against people who are white. So even if Donald Trump did show improvement with the border and did reduce the amount of people crossing, they refused to acknowledge any of it. And in some cases, tried to take credit for some of the things that Trump did. What I see here is it doesn't matter how much harm is coming to this country. It doesn't matter. They cannot agree with anyone on the other side because of their bias and hatred. And this was so clear in the debates that were going on. And let me show you a couple examples. Let's take this first jackass, Delia Ramirez. Now, she is representing the state of Illinois. Yes, the state with the sanctuary city of Chicago, the one right now that's in ruins as a result of these migrants. Listen to how this first-year congresswoman comes in hot and aggressive, only to get smacked down by the chairman. It's brilliant. Watch this.
I now recognize Ms. Ramirez, who may yield to you if she likes.
I'll yield to him in a bit so that you can continue to argue what we know already, that there is no evidence to this impeachment. But here's where I want to go, actually, because we really haven't talked about this piece. Why did we come to this committee? Why did you select this committee of all the other committees? And why did you come to Congress? Because I came to Congress to pass legislation that makes life better for my constituents. That is policy. So, I heard the gentle lady from Georgia talk about wanting to stop the human traffickers. I do too. I absolutely do. The concerns that we have with the illegal crossings, I am also concerned about the illegal crossings. So my question is, let's be honest. Let's say that somehow the Senate vote, that you get this out of this committee at 5 in the morning, wherever we get out of here. You bring it to the floor, and then you get enough votes, right, to impeach, and then you send to the Senate, and let's say that this happens. Then the president has to appoint someone else. What solution have you created? Because here's my thing. None of you ever ask yourselves, what is the root cause of migration? How come 5,000 people are coming through our border? Some of you are mothers and fathers. I'm not one. But I would ask myself, why would a mother be willing to go through Venezuela, into Panama, up through Guatemala, and go through the hell that they go through? Because I've been to Guatemala twice in 1 month, and let me tell you, I've talked to these people. And why wouldn't you ask yourself? Because you're the same people that talk about family values and caring about children. You don't ask yourself, what is going to slow down migration? How do we get to the root cause of migration? And friends, our job in this place is to pass policy that addresses these issues with solutions. So here's what I want to propose to you, to the gentle lady from Georgia, but to every single person here. How about we vote on amendments that create the opportunities to address the issue? How about we actually vote to be able to get funding resources to address the issues of fentanyl that we know we care deeply about? How about those of you that serve in judiciary, you go to judiciary and you create legal pathways, and then all of us vote for that. Because the reality is that no one should have to cross illegally. No one should have to pay $10,000. We shouldn't allow these people to profit. But they are profiting, and our children are dying because of your failure to act. So what I am asking you now, stop laughing, because my family crossed that border. So yes, I take this personal. Let's actually get to the actual work, because you and I know very darn well, impeaching Secretary Mayorkas is not going to solve the problem. And you are going to find more things so that in November you can try to win elections. Let's stop the political theater. Y'all can go back and forth as attorneys as you have. But I come from a background of social work who has been helping thousands of people for 20 years, and I am asking you to go back to the reason you decided to run for Congress in the first place.
There have been some good debate tonight, and there's also been some stuff that I think isn't reflective of the fairness that we try to do. And I want to take issue with you never discuss the root causes, Ms. Ramirez, okay? I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I have the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee right here. We have deeply looked into the root causes of migration. And I have a piece of legislation, and he can talk with you about it, called the Nearshoring Act, where we're bringing manufacturing from China to Latin America, and we give loans for them to go to Guatemala and create opportunities in Guatemala. And there are certain, and actually the Democrat State Department, Ms. Ramirez, I went to Antony Blinken, I said, help me make this right. And his expert on Central America gave me good substantive changes to the bill. And so that would allow them to have arrows in their quiver, so to speak, to hold governments in Latin America and throughout the region, to task on corruption and on crime and all the other things that are also root causes. So the assertion that all of us aren't addressing the root causes, that's not a fair statement. So the substantive debate is great. The accusations, a blanket statement like that, it's just wrong, because there are people here that are deeply engaged with legislation that we've written with Democrat assistance to try to address the root causes. So I guess I'm just making a point about our debate. I appreciate it when there's some back and forth and people are granting, and that's a beautiful thing, because we have a disagreement about whether or not this rises to a high crime or misdemeanor, or whether or not it's policy versus, a policy that violates the laws. That's good to discuss. That's the substantive stuff. Making a blanket accusation about someone's involvement in the root cause, especially when it's blatantly wrong, We shouldn't do that.
I give this guy Green a lot of credit. He chaired over this 15-hour marathon committee hearing and didn't lose his cool once. I know I would have lost my cool with some of these folks, like this guy Menendez from New Jersey, and another freshman Democrat coming in hot at the Republicans.
Left off regarding what we have jurisdiction over in this committee, right? And you and Mr. Jimenez have talked about the intentionality, the purpose in which the border policy has been constructed by the Biden administration to allow people into the country. It was part of H.R. 2 when you went after NGOs, because NGOs are part of this conspiracy to circumvent our American laws. You're right that this is Homeland Security, right? And we don't have jurisdiction like Chair McCall does in foreign affairs or certain things. We have a wide range of jurisdiction here, yet we have been singularly focused on the border at the detriment. You know, the thing for me and so many of the other committee members here from New York, both sides of the aisle, this was a select committee after 9/11. That means something to me. It means something to a lot of people on this committee. And we can talk about the border. A lot of us have been to the border. We have people from border states. I myself, in my first year, went to the border twice. We care. And you want to talk, the chair alluded to how we treat each other in this committee. There have been a lot of accusations about Democrats. We don't care. We want to have our head in the sand. That's not true. But we listened. We had a conversation. Let's talk about this committee and its jurisdiction. We've held 17 hearings, 17 on the border. And this impeachment's part of that. We have held zero, I repeat, zero full committee hearings dedicated to emergency preparedness, cyber threats, infrastructure protection, transportation security, Department of Homeland Security management, or information sharing and intelligence efforts. With the global dynamic that we have not lived up to our oversight obligation here on this committee because you all are obsessed with the border. Because you bend the knee to the orange Jesus, as you refer to him across the aisle. That's what this is about. And we have failed our jurisdiction on this committee. So I'm tired of being lectured. You know, I try to listen here. I try to be a team player. I really do. I try not to engage in the partisanship, but I've had it. I've listened to a lot of accusations here today. We are here on a sham impeachment hearing because of the partisanship of this committee, and enough is enough. Ms. Green asked the American people. The American people are listening. They are, and they're tired of the partisanship of this Republican majority that has failed to get things done. I yield back to the chair.
The gentleman yields, and as a point of order, the cyber subcommittee's met many times, and actually, it doesn't matter. We actually have passed. I'm not going to argue with you, and I have the floor because I'm making a point of order as the chair. Okay, we have passed multiple cyber bills out of this, and actually, Mr. Swalwell and I did them together. Mr. Garbarino did some across the aisle. You can't say all. One of the things we often do is we say all and never and everybody. You just be careful with those
Mr.
words.
Chair, I said zero full committee hearings. Zero full committee hearings. You're talking about legislation. I said zero full committee hearings.
We've had markups on cyber in this full committee, so it has happened.
I so enjoyed watching Mark Green slap this entitled prick down. For those that don't know, Rob Menendez is the son of Bob Menendez, who is a senator for New Jersey. And it just so happens last year he was indicted again on federal corruption charges that he aided and provided sensitive information to the government of Egypt. The first time around he was indicted was in 2015, where Menendez was charged with bribery, fraud, and making false statements. And according to this indictment, Menendez asked top State Department officials to pressure the Dominican Republic's government to enforce a port security contract that would benefit Menendez's top donors, which at the same time, in return for doing this, he received $60,000 for his campaign. Now, with the recent indictment, we're starting to see the Democrats turn on their own people. So right now, everyone is moving away and pretty much turning their backs on Bob Menendez. It's yet to be seen as to what's going to happen to his son, Rob Menendez. Next up, we have Robert Garcia, who is a House representative for California. This guy is also a new guy, as well as a choach. Listen to him talk about, again, Donald Trump.
Now, this is the same member who introduced the articles we're voting on today and the articles of impeachment against President Biden on his first day.
The gentleman is reminded that he's to talk on the point of order of germaneness of the amendment.
Absolutely. So this is germane because this is all to appease Donald Trump. Now, the majority isn't remotely serious about solutions. This is about electing Donald Trump and political hits against President Biden. Now, Donald Trump today is sabotaging any negotiations because he thinks the border crisis helps him politically.
Mr. Chairman,
My amendment
point of order. The
sets the
argument
record
does not
straight.
speak to the point to the issue.
Yeah, and I'm
of the
concluding. My
germaneness
amendment
of the
will set the record
amendment.
straight on this impeachment
Hold on
scam.
just a second. The gentleman's point of order as well.
My point of order is that the argument and the chair admonished the gentleman, but he persists in arguing the substance of his amendment, not its germaneness.
That is correct. The substance of the amendment is the
ANS.
point of order is to the germaneness. So you need to argue the germaneness of this.
And it's germane
to
because
the-
it's about, sir, it's about the process of this impeachment. This impeachment, what I believe and we believe is an impeachment scam and sham. And so this is about the process. To conclude, I think my amendment sets the record straight on this impeachment process. No due process has been given to the secretary, and I urge the committee to adopt it. And for the remainder of my time, I'd like to turn to Ranking Member Thompson.
This went on for hours with the Democrats that you see in front of you. They lied, they twisted the narrative, they ignored the facts, and they were making shit up. Their claims of Mayorkas not violating the Constitution, but he did. And so many of them brought out their little Constitution booklets and started reading from it and saying that he didn't neglect his duty. He said that the border was under control. And then these jackasses resort to making up excuses after the Republicans slap them in their faces with facts such as, oh, well, he can't do this because he doesn't have enough resources, but it's the Republicans' fault because they won't approve any more funding. Well, yeah, they're right to hold back funding because they've been given more than enough money. And the situation is like 1,000 times worse than the last administration. So why would they give more money if they know that it's not going to be used because the guy is not doing his job? This willfully ignorant bunch really did not listen to a thing that the Republicans were saying, even as facts were being put directly in front of them. This group spent the entire time making the case that Mayorkas did not qualify to be impeached, meaning he did follow his job, he did everything that he's supposed to do, and the reason why the border is like all upside down is because of policy. No, he particularly removed policy that was working. But they're saying, well, if you don't like the way that he is doing his job, that's not a reason to impeach. And, saying that it doesn't apply, impeachment does not imply when it comes to the Constitution. That's when Mr. Higgins from Louisiana, who's becoming a favorite of mine, jumps in to give a little history lesson to the Democrats. Take a listen.
I now recognize Mr. Higgins for 5 minutes of his comments on the
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
amendment.
Chairman.
When I first came to Congress, Mr. Chairman, I have the great honor of befriending the gentleman from Alaska, the Dean of the House, Don Young. I had the privilege of sitting next to Don for 5 years before his death. Don told me when I first came to Congress, he said, Clay, if you want to understand this body, you have to understand a simple fact. He said the Republican Party is primarily a party of businessmen. The Democrat Party is primarily a party of attorneys. That's being shown quite clearly today. So let this old street cop give some of our fancy attorneys on the other side of the aisle a little history lesson. When it was first proposed to limit impeachments in the American Constitution to treason and bribery alone, Virginia Delegate George Mason pointed out that Hastings, who was being impeached at the time by Parliament, is not guilty of treason. Mason questioned the wisdom of limiting impeachment to those two offenses, arguing that treason is defined in the Constitution, as defined in the Constitution, would not reach many great and dangerous offenses that attempts to subvert the Constitution may not be treason as defined, and that it's the more necessary to extend the power of impeachments. Mason then moved that the convention add maladministration to the impeachment power. Eldridge Jerry seconded the motion. Then James Madison argued that the term maladministration, which deviated from the more commonly recognized phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, was so vague a term that it would be the equivalent to a tenure during pleasure of the Senate. Quote of Madison. Governor Morris agreed with Madison, at which point Mason withdrew his motion and substituted as grounds for impeachment, quote, bribery and high crimes and misdemeanors. Bribery and other high crimes and misdemeanors. The motion carried without any further discussion of the new phrase, which ultimately became part of the Constitution. Here's the bottom line. As historians summarize, the actions of the delegates of the Constitutional Convention stated that, in summary, through the early debates, every speaker referred to neglect of duty and misconduct in office as impeachable offenses. And after Madison objected to the vagueness of the proposed impeachment clause, Mason then moved to add high crimes and misdemeanors. This passed 8-3 and became the orthodox phraseology. The vote in favor of the compromise motion suggests that the delegates understood that the new terms included neglect of duty. The addition of misdemeanors to the list of offenses meant that the House of Representatives was permitted to charge officials with misuse of power and neglect of duty. As has been quoted by many scholars, specifically, the term misdemeanors in its original meaning carried with it less the sense of a smaller or less serious criminal law offense, which would be today's common usage of the word, and more the broader sense of misconduct or misbehavior, literally of not demeaning oneself properly, misdemeaning in the exercise of an official capacity or position. The breadth of the constitutional language employed as a standard for impeachment thus plainly embraces a range of congressional judgment extending beyond bare criminality as to what types of culpable official misconduct so amount to a betrayal of trust, responsibility, duty, or integrity as to warrant removal from office. And that's where we are today.
Will the gentleman?
My colleagues, no, I will not. You didn't yield to me, my brother.
I don't
My
recall
colleagues
any
across the aisle seem to say that it's acceptable that we've had 10 million illegal crossings in 3 years, that we've had pushing 300,000 Americans dead from opioid overdose. We're losing our country down there, and the man responsible for executing that policy is Alejandro Mayorkas. He will be impeached through this committee this day. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Make no mistake, this border crisis is intentional, and the Democrats are all following the same script that is being directed from the man in charge at the top. Today, 154 House Democrats have voted against penalizing illegal aliens who evade Border Patrol, meaning that they can't apprehend them, run background checks to see if they're coming from gangs or if they are terrorists. They're like, nope, go on, be free, good luck, go live your dream in America. And by the way, make sure you take advantage of all those benefits that the American taxpayer is paying for. A good majority of these Democrats are like just going with the flow, not wanting to rock the boat, just going along with what everybody else is saying, just because they're part of a party, but not necessarily doing the right thing, like Miss Jackson Lee here. She was like so irritating yesterday.
I started this morning by describing this impeachment proceedings as revengeful impeachment, simply to get back at a performing member of the public sector who is directed by his boss, the President of the United States, to follow laws and policies. I say this to the American people because we pretend that our work here today and every day we come to this Congress, having taken an oath, is for the American people. There is no doubt that on this side of the aisle, there is a committed and dedicated concern to the idea of sex trafficking. Abhor human trafficking, abhor any form of drug trafficking, terrorism. There is no doubt that every member that I know on the Democratic side of the aisle has been engaged vigorously in fighting against these terroristic acts. Each and every one of them is a terroristic act to be trafficked, to be subjected to drug trafficking. All of these require the work together for the American people. Today, we are being fooled that work is being done against an individual for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The American people understand that that is not the actions that we are here for today. Revenge, vengefulness is why we're here. Otherwise, they would understand that Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is an individual whose family fled the Nazis and then Cuba before arriving here in the United States. That is what he went through. He is the first immigrant to serve as head of the Department of Homeland Security. And yet, this committee seeks to suggest that he is violating the Constitution, when in essence, his freedom is based upon our Constitution.
Are you guys aware of the job title of Alejandro Mayorkas, Mr. Knudsen?
His specific job title is Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, I'm no constitutional scholar, Mr. Drummond, but just from that job title alone, would you assess that maybe his job might be to secure and protect the homeland?
He has the duty to control and guard our homeland.
Mr. Bailey, is Secretary Mayorkas doing that?
He has abdicated his official legal responsibilities and his moral and ethical responsibilities to this nation.
Mr. Knudsen, is he doing that?
He absolutely is not. He is derelict in many of those duties.
Let's be real. This is something that they don't like hearing, but they have become a Marxist party. And that is something more people need to wake up to because of the control that they're trying to take here. And we see it playing out at this moment. It's dangerous when you have these Democrats who have hard facts in front of them and they refuse to accept it.
He did block the unlawful act of separating parents from children under the Trump administration. Maybe that's why he's being attacked. He did act as a federal prosecutor, not as, in quotes, a liberal activist.
Liar.
To be able to recognize that we should treat immigrants with dignity.
Liar.
He did act to be able to secure our ports and borders and enforce immigration laws, and he did act to fight for comprehensive immigration reform.
Liar.
But
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to be clear here today that this is not political theater. That what is happening today is we are attempting to rein in a rogue cabinet secretary. A cabinet secretary that has failed to enforce the law. If you don't believe that, just look at the statistics put out by his department. In the last 6 months, Mr. Chairman, we have seen 1.9 million encounters across the entire northern and southern border. Last month alone, 371,000. And in addition to that, Mr. Chairman, we are not talking about the fact that this secretary has breached the public trust. Just last hearing that we had on this, we saw the Democrats call in a congressional expert who said you don't have to have high crimes and misdemeanors. Their own expert in constitutional law says that a cabinet secretary could be breached or could be impeached for a breach of public trust. And I will tell you that that is exactly what we have with Secretary Mayorkas, that he has lied repeatedly to members of this committee. I can count times in which he has lied to questions that I have asked Secretary Mayorkas, where he's lied to questions where Chairman Green has asked him about the border being secured. Questions by Dan Bishop, August Pfluger, Ms. Jackson Lee, former member of this committee, Kat Kamak. I can document at least 6 times where he has repeatedly lied when asked, is the border secure? I look at headlines and pulled a few this morning regarding Secretary Mayorkas.
Gentleman, you for a question?
I will not. Mayorkas tells Congress the southern border is secure. DHS Chief Mayorkas said there is no border crisis. Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas tells lawmakers the border is not open. Mayorkas says the border is closed, defends Biden's immigration strategy. Mayorkas takes heat for repeating border is secure. During House hearings, they go on to say this is nonsense. DHS Chief Alejandro Mayorkas' secure border claim a lie, CBP official says. Mayorkas accused of lying under oath, playing shell game with data by former border official. And my favorite, Mr. Chairman, Mayorkas' latest litanies of lies on the border put Santos to shame. These are the headlines, and these are what are being talked about because Secretary Mayorkas has been untruthful with the American public, and he has been untruthful for Congress. He comes in here and he raises his hand and he swears to tell the truth, and then he lies when he says the border's secure. He lies when he says that the border is not open and we are not allowing, as we know, over 370,000 immigrants to flood across the border last month alone. I want to talk about what House Republicans have done, because my friends on the other side say that we are doing this again for political theater. Last year we passed H.R. 2, the most comprehensive package that I have seen during my time in Congress. When we talk about funding and what have we done on funding, I'll tell you that the House Appropriations Bill dealing with funding for the Department of Homeland Security, we went above and beyond what was requested by the President. The President requested a set amount, and we added additional money to that so that the Department of Homeland Security would have the resources that they need to secure the border. And then when we talk about the Senate bill, I have no idea what's in the Senate bill. I'll tell you, I am disappointed that our senators refuse to engage the House of Representatives. They don't allow Chairman Green or Ranking Member Thompson a seat at the table. We don't know what's in that bill. I can't speak of whether I'll support the bill or not. We've seen that. I will not yell, and I have 30 seconds and I will finish my time. I will tell you that for the Democrats to accuse Republicans of political theater is wrong. I want to end with this. I want to end with the fact that there was a recent letter. A letter actually was dated in 2021 by former official Rodney Scott. Rodney was chief of Border Patrol under both Trump and Biden. That letter described how he witnessed a seismic shift in border security and immigration policy that began on January 20, 2021. And that began with a lack of a meaningful effort to secure the border. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record, and I would yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I strongly oppose the articles of impeachment offered by the majority here today. Let's talk about the majority's motivations to bring these articles to be marked up. They claim it's about law and order. However, the 2 articles we are considering today fail to meet the bar of Article 2, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. This little document set the basis for our democracy. This document here. At times I wonder if some of you have even looked at this. But if need be, I can have one sent to your office. Article 2, Section 4 states the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason. Is there any indication that Secretary Marcus has committed treason, bribery. Has there been any indication that Secretary Mayorkas has accepted money for illegals coming across the border? High crimes and misdemeanors. Nothing applies in Section 2. And you can continue to dismiss it in the Constitution. It's interesting how we can ignore the Constitution at times, but then when it presents itself to your need, that you cite it. The accusations levied against Secretary Mayorkas in these articles amount to nothing but more than policy disagreements. Then let's work on policy. Let's work on policy. If there's a problem, let's give Secretary Mayorkas the tools that he needs. But you're unwilling. The Senate Republicans are willing to work with it, but you got the dictator for one day telling you not to go along with it. There simply isn't anything regarding treason, bribery, or high kinds of misdemeanors. In his role, Secretary Mayorkas has carried out his duties and responsibilities with unwavering dedication to the public trust. Now, you may disagree with that, so then let's have that discussion. Let's work on the policy that will make it better. He has not broken the law, and he has not done the best he can to keep order, given the tools that the majority has provided him with in terms of resources and tools to humanely address the issues along the southern border. It is not about the law and order, then maybe it's about policy. As Democrats, we have laid out over the past few hearings, impeachment is a political tool that will fail to solve any issues that requires a policy-based solution. Once Mayorkas is gone, does that mean everything is okay? Is that the real issue? Or do problems persist? This is nothing more than a political stunt on an issue that requires a serious policy solution. Building a wall with taxpayer dollars is not a serious policy solution. Closing our borders in an attempt to ensure no immigrants seeking asylum comes in is not a serious policy solution. Starving our Border Patrol personnel of resources they need to protect the homeland is not a serious policy solution. We should come together and find reasonable, humane, and equitable proposals to address this complex issue and put forth a serious policy solution that upholds our values as a country and a society. Instead, we have Chairman Green and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the other members on the majority seem to believe impeaching Senator Mayorkas.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Is an action that will fix
I
the
now,
issue.
the gentleman is not recognized. The next up is Mr. Jimenez for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And look, somebody said that Republicans are businessmen and women and Democrats are lawyers. Well, I'm neither. I'm neither a business person or an attorney. I'm actually just a firefighter. And I'm very proud to be a firefighter, but firefighters tend to look at things, kind of not so much shades of gray as maybe business people and attorneys do. And so, there's a raging fire happening at the border, and that was demonstrated to me pretty soon after the Biden administration took over. And as a firefighter, what you do is you try to put the fire out, and then you look for what caused the fire. Well, the fire in this case wasn't accidental. It was actually lit on purpose. And I've said that for a couple of years. Not just now. I've said it for a couple of years. This was actually done on purpose. And the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas are using policy to mask unlawful behavior. You can talk about policy all you want, but that policy, when that policy actually is unlawful behavior, it's unlawful behavior that we're talking about here. It's not a difference in policy. It's the unlawful behavior of the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas that has led to that fire that is putting America at risk. Not only is it putting America at risk, it's putting Mexico at risk too, because the cartels that control the southern part of that border are being enriched by the policies, the unlawful policies of the Biden administration, to the tune of where they were making $500 million a year for illegal trafficking, of human trafficking. Now they're making $1 billion a month, over $13 billion. And so the Secretary and the Secretary has always denied that there's a problem. Now even President Biden says, hey, we got a problem. So basically, like you said, Mr. Chairman, he threw him under the bus. But we've had witness after witness after witness saying, hey, we've told the Secretary what he had to do in order to stem the flow of illegal migration into the United States. And as my colleagues so demonstrated, that spike didn't happen during the Trump administration. It happened in February of 2021, right after President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas changed the policy, which was a clear violation of the law and clearly contrary to the will of this Congress. The only remedy that we have is impeachment. For the opposing side to say, no, we can't, it's discretion. So if we write a law that says, hey, you have to paint that thing blue, and they decide to do it red, and then, well, that's just discretion. No. When you violate the law, when you go contrary to the will of Congress, Congress must act, especially when failure to do so puts America at risk. And so, again, I see this very clearly. This fire was started by Secretary Mayorkas, reversing policies that were working. It's his absolute discretion to change policy, but it's not his discretion to change policy when it violates the law. And that's where
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I won't, because actually I'm just going to yield my time back. Thank you very much.
Patrol agent agreed to speak with us but didn't want to go on camera. Normally, agents are not allowed to be interviewed, and all press requests are typically deferred to a public information officer who rarely ever responds. But in this instance, the agent seemed exhausted and eager to tell me what was going on.
No, there's very few of them evading.
How come?
Well, because they allowed them in. They don't evade because they'll let them come in. They load them in the vans. They take them up to Phoenix, give them a $3,000 gift card and a cell phone, and send them wherever they want to go. You get a court date. You have 2 years to show up in court. That's the reason they give them a phone, because they're saying if they don't give me a phone, I don't know when I'm supposed to go to court. So they give them a phone.
At first, I was confused what the Border Patrol agent meant when he kept referring to they. To the naked eye, it appears that Border Patrol is the one handling and processing the migrants, but they're only the first step in a chain of bureaucratic authority that goes up to the Department of Homeland Security, then finally up to the Department of Justice's Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is more or less controlled by the Biden administration, who've taken a much more open arms approach to immigration after pulling back Title 42 just about a year ago.
What you are upset about is that Secretary Mayorkas rescinded prior executive orders that were working. And you have a right to be upset about that. And you have a right to talk about that. And you have a right to express your dissatisfaction in any way you choose. And you have a right to make that case to the American people so that they vote Secretary Mayorkas and this president out of office in November if that's ultimately what the people believe. But you do not have a right to demean this institution, to bastardize the impeachment clause of the Constitution, to belittle the standard of constitutional impeachment to such a degree that you can't even produce a legal memo in support of your articles of impeachment that do not exist in history and do not exist in the law. And if, in fact, as you allege here, there were false statements made to Congress or obstruction of Congress, those are crimes. You could have charged him with those, but you didn't want to because you knew you couldn't actually prove them. You just want to make the allegations and concoct some crazy breach of public trust which does not exist.
The gentleman's time has
Thank you,
expired.
Mr. Tanadar, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes to discuss the ANS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to have the opportunity to take issue with the gentleman from New York. But before I do, on the foundations of impeachment and why it's appropriate in this case, I think I ought to talk about what the news is, because there's not much news about these articles of impeachment. We've been moving toward this process with great deliberation and in open. This committee has, on the leadership of Chairman Green, for months. It's not a surprise to anyone. Let me tell you what the news is. The news is that Mr. Goldman just said that the situation at the border is untenable. The news is that on January 20th, the President of the United States, when asked by White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich if the U.S.-Mexico border is secure, he said, "No, it's not." He said, "I haven't believed that for the last 10 years, and I've said it for the last 10 years. Well, as we hear many members on the other side hold forth about supposed hypocrisy over here, I got to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. We've been saying the same thing this entire administration from the beginning, from January 2021, when the president disposed of multiple policies at the border that had been the most successful in history for containing illegal immigration, rejected them wholesale. And ever since, members of this committee on the other side have been trumpeting how successful this has been. It's been great. There's not a problem at the border. Chairman Green has materials released that, and if you count them up, 32 statements by the Secretary of Homeland Security asserting that the border is secure and that we have operational control of the border. A couple of examples. March 2021, I want to repeat my assurance to our audience this morning that the border is in fact secure. September 2021, Senator Ron Johnson, you have repeatedly stated that our borders are not open, they are closed. Do you honestly believe that our borders are closed? Mayorkas, Senator, I do, and let me speak to that. In July 2022, to ABC's Martha Raddatz, just a simple question, do you think it's working? Mayorkas, I think we are doing a good job. Me, November 2022, Secretary Mayorkas, do you continue to maintain that the border is secure? Mayorkas, yes. Goes on and on, 32 times. Until suddenly Mr. Goldman says, and others have said it here today, it's not tenable. Maybe it was because Eric Adams from New York said, you're destroying New York City. Maybe it's because the mayor of Chicago said, you got to send us more money, we're in crisis over here. Or Denver, or any of a number of other Democrat-run cities. That's the news. That's the news. This impeachment, these articles of impeachment present a very narrow question, which no one seems to want to follow the line of reasoning long enough to get to. What the Supreme Court said in United States versus Texas, both the majority and the dissent, is that Congress, 20 years ago, mandated restriction of the administration's prosecutorial authority. In certain specific cases, you will detain, and detain until you have removed. And yes, Secretary Mayorkas has brazenly flouted and disobeyed those laws, those statutory laws. He wrote guidelines that said it shall not be a basis to detain anyone if they're in those, just because they're in those categories that Congress declared in law. So that's what's happened over and over again. The articles of impeachment specify 7 separate statutory commands by the Congress that Secretary Mayorkas has similarly flouted and brazenly disobeyed. And I ask the question, if someone wants to take it up, if the Congress does not impeach, what indeed is the remedy?
I'd love to take it up.
I'm going to finish
legislation.
I'll pose it. I've got 37 seconds, and you'll have plenty of time to address it. I'd be glad to have the colloquy. But what is the remedy? Well, Justice Alito made it clear in the dissent what the remedy is. Congress can impeach. Yes, Congress could do something else. Congress could cut off the money.
But there are limits to what Congress can do. I mean, you can beg the question whether Congress has any power to restrict the discretion of the executive. The Supreme Court seems to think that it does, but it has said we are not the forum to vindicate those restrictions. That's what this process is about. It is about vindicating the rule of law in our constitutional system.
Folks, that was just a flavor of what we're dealing with here. Yesterday, this is how the session went for 15 hours. It was nonstop ignoring what the facts were and putting it all back onto Trump. And as you can see here, Chuck Schumer already has given us a preview as to what will be discussed now when this goes to the Senate. And the thing that scares me is that in the Senate, it's the Democrats that have the control. So is this going to go anywhere? I don't know. I'm thinking it might not because you have the Democrats who are in control of the Senate. And even in this House committee, nobody was willing to budge on coming to some type of compromise. The Republicans were firmly set with their facts. And the Democrats did not give any type of substantial validation or proof to the arguments that they were making about Alejandro Mayorkas. I believe it's going to be the same thing in the Senate. What's a real disappointment is that even in the face of being warned, as this former FBI letters that went to Congress, Chuck Schumer's name was listed as one of the congressmen that it was addressed to. So if he is stating and coming out outright using the strategy that the Democrats seem to be using by blaming Trump, I don't trust that the Senate will do the right thing for the American people, as is my senators, as well as my politicians here, do not listen to its people. I mean, you've seen evidence of that. It's like, what do you do when you have leadership in place that are doing this for whatever selfish reasons, clearly, that we're seeing here? Look, don't get me wrong, not all Republicans are saints. What I'm witnessing just in this isolated incident with the border, which is a major impact on my life here, is that the Republicans are doing the right thing for the American people. You can see it for yourself if you watched the hearing. I watched all 15 hours of it, and it's clear to me that they put the American people at the heart of the matter here, which is what we expect our politicians to do. The Democrats did not do that. Only Ms. Jackson Lee started to make it appear, which didn't come across in any way sincere, that the American people is really on their mind and they go to work for us. No, they don't. They don't go to work for us. They go to work for themselves. And we see that playing out in real time. And what is clear is that the left would rather burn this country to the ground before they allow Donald Trump to take back office. It's a joke when they say that they want to preserve democracy. They killed it. From time to time, I think about how awesome our country could have been had Ross Perot been elected into office. He was really serious about bringing jobs back to the U.S. and getting us out of this $4 trillion debt. We look at $4 trillion today compared to our $34 trillion that we have right now. You kind of have to wonder what that would have looked like and the prosperity that this country would have had. I really did believe he had the right plan. In fact, I still believe that he has the right plan.
Very briefly, I've been speaking out for years on the fact that we have a government that comes at us from Washington, and the framers of the Constitution intended for us to have a government that comes from the people. In the last couple of years, I have been pounding on the fact that nothing happens up here, and we have government in gridlock, where every morning the Congress and the White House get up, throw rocks at one another all day, and then go home and go to bed at night, and nothing constructive happens, even though we have many, many problems. I've said again and again, we have a government of words, but no action. I've been frustrated and spoken out on it for a long period of time that when things go wrong, nobody steps forward and takes responsibility, and we have to hire special prosecutors who spend $40 or $50 million and finally never figure out what did they know and when did they know it. And I personally would be a whole lot happier when people make mistakes. They just step forward and say, well, I blew that one. Let everybody get upset at them. Next day, go back to work. I've been saying that the theme of both parties this year is, can we buy your vote with your money? And by the way, we'd like to borrow $400 billion of your children's money to buy your vote this year. And my reaction has been, do they really think we're that dumb? Their reaction is, gee, it's always worked, maybe it'll work again. $400 billion just this year, $4 trillion total debt. My frustration is, let's assume we have $4 trillion in debt. We should be able to look at a perfect country. Our cities should outshine even Singapore because we have spent so much money. And yet when you look around, you see problems everywhere. The most violent, crime-ridden society in the industrialized world. We rank at the bottom of the industrialized world in terms of educational achievement. We've got 5% of the world's population, 50% of the world's cocaine use. And just to throw in a sidebar, with 5% of the world's population, we have 2/3 of the world's lawyers. So we're the most litigious society in the industrialized world. A little different category, but I just thought I'd throw it in. Let's assume we wanted to do radical things to balance the budget. Now we're just going to do some really radical things to eliminate that $400 billion deficit. Well, this is unthinkable. It would be irresponsible, but let's just close the Defense Department. Shut her down. That won't give you $400 billion. Well, let's close the public schools nationwide. They spend a lot of money. That won't give you $400 billion. All right? Let's just go traditional and increase taxes. You will have to double personal income tax to balance the budget this year. You can't do that. Well, we don't want to take it away from the folks. Let's just take it away from business. Now let's really go radical and confiscate the profits of the Fortune 500 companies. None of these things you would even think about doing. What's my point? I'm trying to get over how big $400 billion is. If we confiscated the profits of the Fortune 400 companies, we'd have half what we need. Let's cure then one of the age-old problems of this country. Let's just get rid of the rich folks. Let's confiscate all the wealth. Now, I've said for years, I just wish they'd take it all so we could go on to some other subject. Now, I'm just bluffing, so, don't get me wrong here. But now then, we're thinking about it. Well, let's confiscate all the wealth in the Forbes 400. We cannot balance the budget. Now, we're all blue-collar now. We're all in it together next year, but we didn't balance the budget. Now, that's how big a $400 billion deficit is. A $4 trillion deficit is a choker, and that's where we are as a country. At the Tax and Budget Summit, they told us that if we agreed to the tax increase, we'd have a $90 billion deficit over the next 5 years. Just this one year, we have $400 billion. A few months later, after Tax and Budget Summit, they told us it would not be $90 billion, it would be $1 trillion. But we got 4/10 of $1 trillion in just this 1 year. They didn't tell us at all that for every dollar of taxes that were raised, they increased spending at the same time, they being the White House and Congress, by $1.83. So we increase spending more than we increase taxes. This is a government that comes at us, not from us. As I look at our country now, I can't help but thinking of General Motors in the mid-'80s. General Motors was still rich, there were problems, there was time to fix the problems. You should not wait till the clock runs out to take action. General Motors is now bleeding $500 million a month. They recently raised $1.5 billion in financing. That keeps them afloat for 3 months. You know what's happening now. It's tragic. Millions of people depend on General Motors for a job. They don't employ millions, but 5 people have a job for every person that has a job at General Motors. What's my point? We've got 2 choices in our country. The most likely is we'll wait until the clock breaks and then spend 15 to 20 years fixing it, and millions of people will be ripped to pieces. Or we can start to work on it now. And I feel very, very strongly that we need to start to work on it now while time is still on our side. We're losing an entire year because of the election process. Our primary job in this country, overriding any other, is to stabilize the deteriorating job base, because as you lose jobs, you lose taxpayers. And here's an interesting one not many people think about. When a taxpayer becomes a welfare user, his or her welfare check exceeds what their payments used to be to the IRS. So there's more than a double hit. Now, briefly, the history of the volunteer effort is for years I've been asked if I'd run for office. The answer was no. Larry King asked me to come on his program to talk about the economy. First question, would you run for president? Answer, no. We talked for an hour about some of these things I briefly mentioned this morning. At the end, he said, is there any scenario? And I told him, the key thing I said during the hour, I said, it doesn't matter who you elect as president. You could elect Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. And he cannot fix these problems, and the problem is the American people have abdicated their responsibilities as owners of this country. And the only way you'll get this country back on track is to rebuild a government that comes from us and get rid of a government that comes at us driven by special interests.
I definitely am going to continue to keep following this particular situation closely. You don't want to miss it, so please don't forget to subscribe and like this video so you can be notified of more informative videos such as this. As I've said this before, this is a learning journey for me, and I've set this channel up to invite anyone who wants to come along to help get to a semblance of truth and reality. I believe that it is the responsibility of each of us to take ownership of our freedoms. The more informed we are, the better we can make choices instead of having